courtroom and the hurdles that we have to deal with in order to win in the courtroom. Because frankly, as plaintiffs' attorneys, nothing happens unless we win. So we have to know what are our issues, how are we going to deal with them. We're all going to talk about a little bit of experiences that we've had and the different approaches that we take to the different challenges that we have. And so it was interesting because I had just finished this 3-week trial, and I had done a bunch of focus groups for it. And I was very emotional when I was doing my focus groups because I had a beautiful young client and I had really gotten to know her family. I mean, the first time I went into their home in Michigan, she was laying in a hospital bed and the entire house had just been converted to taking care of her, and her mom did not sleep for years. Literally, she would have to get up every hour and 50 minutes at night to put formula into her feeding tube, and her entire life she slept beside her was for her daughter, which had obviously affected the entire family, and they all contributed to the help. The aunts contributed. And I left that house, and at the time I went there, I didn't have my own children, and I've had this case for so long, I now have 2. But when I left that house, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first time I've ever seen true love. Like, I just had never seen it before. And I really got to know the family. And so as I'm doing these focus groups, we had a day in the life video, and I kept tearing up and or crying during the focus groups. And in the debrief, I was hearing consistently, especially from men and then one woman, is that they didn't like to see that emotion. They were like, she seemed really good and dire, and she obviously knew what she was doing, but why is she crying? Is she, is she's trying to get sympathy? A few were like, well, maybe she can't do her job. This is the courtroom. There's no place for, emotion in the courtroom. And a couple of the women were like, well, she clearly cares about her client. I want an attorney like that. She cares about her client. But obviously, I really needed to figure out, well, what's going to work for me? Because I can't just get all females on my jury, although I had done empirical jury research and I knew I needed females on my jury. And so I kept working it, and I tried to do a few different things. I tried to talk about it in voir dire, to say, this is an emotional case. If you see me be emotional, and kind of ask forgiveness early. And then during the trial, I was able to hold it together. I cracked a few times, my voice cracked, but I didn't cry. And I got through the whole thing, and I thought, like, gosh, thank goodness I did it. I really didn't think I would be able to do it. And I didn't want to hurt my client by my own emotion. And then when I was talking to the jury after the verdict came in, a few of the men, I said, what can I do better? Something defense counsel never asks. And they really should, but they don't. I said, what can I, have done better? And a couple of there was like 5 men on the jury. 3 of them were like, well, we didn't like it when you seemed offended when they didn't give you the answer you wanted. We didn't like it when you sometimes laughed in response to their answer. And I was laughing because their answer was ridiculous, right? These experts with these ridiculous opinions. Like, the reason my client went to cardiac arrest is because she had estrogen in her body. I just couldn't help but laugh. It's so ridiculous. And the women on the jury were like, what? And the men were offended that I thought that was funny because it was so funny. I mean, it really was, but they didn't like that. And they're like, and you kept asking the question over and over again, expecting her to give a different answer, for there was this one witness, and we turned her into a meme, which was exactly what I wanted. I wanted her to be a meme. I was assessing the patient. And I wanted to say, like, well, why did you continue to assess her when she told you she was having an allergic reaction? Why would you need to assess her? Why would you check her glucose? She told you what was going on. And so it was so interesting because none of the women on the jury had any kind of criticism like that. And so I was talking actually to the man who I worked with for the jury research, and he sent me these articles, and they're recent studies, 2019 and 2018, and it kind of really hit it on the head that we have, and I've been aware of it and I've always been conscious of it, but I've never really done any research on it as to, I know that when I get mad, I lose credibility. And I know, at least from the men, when I have emotion, I'm in some way losing credibility. So it's a matter of what's the right emotion. You know, how do we get across what we want to get across, where men use anger, and this is what these studies say, men use anger, they gain credibility. Women use anger, they lose credibility. Men show emotion, they gain credibility. Women show emotion, you lose credibility. But you're in there trying to persuade, and you're in there trying to get your point across, and you're in there trying to show just how important it is. But how can you, if you're not allowed to use the traditional emotion that people expect to see in the courtroom? Because when we watch Law and Order and all the other things that the jury sees, they see the anger and the finger pointing and all of these things, and we can't do that. And so as a result, we have to find really kind of creative ways to get our points across. But in the research, and I just wanted to read this, in the research that I got, which was these studies that were done by this professor in Arizona, she said, despite women making up half of the matriculating law students, women make up only 36% of practicing attorneys and only 18% of equity partners. And it goes on to talk about how women are just not perceived to be successful in law. And so the same things that we're battling in the courtroom, we're battling in the workplace. Because when we come in and we're assertive, or we show anger, or we're aggressive in an interview, we're less likely to be hired because we look like we might be someone that they don't want to have to deal with. Where a man comes in and he's aggressive and he seems like a very good option. And so kind of the point of today is to talk about, one, our experiences, and two, the issues that we face and the best way to get around it, because we do a great job. I mean, I cannot tell you the attention to detail, the dedication that I see, especially with the female attorneys in my firm, is just amazing, because the results are great, yet it's perceived that we are not going to do as well as a man, that it should be handed off. And so speaking of handing it off, Bibi, I'm going to hand it off to you for you to talk a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up a little bit right where you left off, which is this this observation that I have also had, that women prepare meticulously. They're more ready. Their presentations are smoother, more flawless, more robust in terms of the different ways of presenting. And that's an observation that I've had for over a decade. So I teach advanced trial advocacy for University of San Diego Law School. And in the last 10 years, all but maybe one or two at most, the student who I selected as having performed the best in my class was a woman. And, I look at, just going back to, women in law school, 51% of law students now are women. A lot of us professors notice how well the women perform, but that doesn't translate into later on in their careers. At about the 5-year mark, we see this mass exodus of women, particularly from litigation and trial work. So anyway, it's been hugely interesting to me, because obviously it's personal to me, but also because I've had all these observations about other women in the law school context. What is happening to all those superstar performers as we go through our career and get a little bit more advanced in terms of the work that we're doing? Okay, so I wanted to talk about a little bit of research as well. And I'm going to share my screen. And there are two studies that I want to bring up. One of them was done in 2019 by a group called Premonition and it talked a lot about why women win. Sorry, it's a 2018 study. This is what the study found. Female partners bill 24 minutes per day more than men, more than their male counterparts. Female lawyers are 23% less likely to be sued for legal malpractice. Female partners win in the courtroom 12% more than men. And the study was comparing litigation performance across 120,000 cases. So this is a pretty big study. And what it found was that women partners in big law beat males in court 70.19% to 57.47%. Women are winning in court more. And it's not just the partners. While there is less of a gap in female associates are still winning more than men as well. And what they call this is a win gap. We see this gap in the terms of women win more, but they show up in the courtroom later on in life as lead trial counsel less. So the question that was posed in this research article is, why is it? We can observe that this is happening, but why is it happening? So there were a couple of theories that were posited. One is the survival of the fittest theory. Because it's such a male-dominated profession, and because there are obstacles that women face in the law that men do not face and may never face, it's the survival of the fittest. Only the best women make it through the gauntlet, and these elite females naturally outperform a glut of mediocre men. And so here's another theory. Female lawyers are somewhat less overconfident in their predictions of case outcomes than males, meaning they are less likely to bring losing cases to court while preparing more diligently for the cases that they do litigate. And there's a site there where that proposition comes from, what study that comes from. So, I thought that was interesting. It's really a twofold thing. Number one, well, actually it's threefold. Number one, we're working harder. Number two, those of us who make it to the point where we're lead trial counsel have had to overcome so many obstacles that we are the cream of the crop. And then number three, we're better at stepping back and not letting our ego get in the way and saying, hey, you know what? I could lose this case. So we're better at assessing which cases we should be bringing to court in the first place. Okay, the second article I want to talk to you about is a 2019 article about persuasion of women versus men in the courtroom. And this article looked specifically at expert witnesses, but I think it applies equally to persuasion by the attorneys. So there were some interesting things in this article as well. And just a couple of the big key points is that this is a matter of heuristics, right? Stereotyping is a matter of heuristics. And so in other words, when we're listening to somebody talk, we're not always judging them 100% on their merit. That there are times that we are not motivated enough to put in the effort to judge their merit, or that we don't have the capacity. Our capacity to put in that effort to process is low. Then naturally, as a human being, we're going to jump to these heuristics and we're going to start making assumptions based on things that we can see, like this person is a woman. So it happens when human beings, when our jurors need to conserve cognitive demand, either because of low motivation or because it's just too complex, it's too difficult, it requires too much work. And what the research found was that when women were performing in a role that was traditionally female, they performed better. They were more persuasive. When men were performing in a role that was traditionally male, they were better, they were more persuasive. So there's this concept of role congruity. If we can use the parts of our gender stereotype that are good for us, if we can take advantage of those parts that are good for us, we are going to be more persuasive in court. Okay, so what does that mean? The stereotypes. Well, when we look at the top occupations of working women, we can see what our stereotype is, right? Secretaries, administrative assistants, nurses, teachers. That, I think, is the most important one that we as women can take advantage of, right? Because every juror is going to hearken back to that time in elementary school or middle school when there was probably a woman standing in front of them, teaching them. The woman was the holder of knowledge and was imparting that on the student. And so when the teacher said something, it was important. When the teacher wrote something down, it was important. We assume that the teacher was motivated to teach us, to help us. And so the motivation behind that teacher standing in front of the courtroom was a good one. So these are things that we can take advantage of. If we can put ourselves in the role of teacher, we are stepping into a gender role that is consistent, where we're going to take the most advantage of our ability to persuade. And when you look at all those other jobs that are listed there as the top female occupations, they're helpers and they're people who care. So as long as we are teaching, helping, caring, we're entirely consistent with what the stereotype of the world says we should be. Okay. The last thing they found was there was no difference in damages. Whether it was a male or a female, whether they were in their role or out of their role, when it came down to damages, there was no difference between the sexes. So this whole idea that like men get bigger verdicts, it's just not true. So here are the big takeaways from this article. Keep it simple. If we don't want our jury jumping to our stereotype, then we have to make it easy for them. We have to reduce the cognitive load so that they don't rely on their heuristics. Show them why they should care. If the problem is that they're jumping to heuristics because they're not motivated, let's motivate them. And then if as long and as much as we can stay in the role of teacher, caring person, helper, we're going to be right in the smack dab in the middle of our stereotype, which is where at least this research found will be most persuasive. So, okay. I'll bounce it back to you, Christian, if you wanted to say anything before I kind of give a couple examples or introduce Courtney since she's here.
Yeah, no, I wanted to introduce Courtney, not that she needs any introduction, but Courtney, you didn't miss much. We were just going over the statistics that you probably already know, which is we have so many stereotypes we have to get over to make sure that we win in the courtroom. But like Bibi said, we're winning. And the perception that we aren't is so incorrect because we're just perceived to be weaker in the practice of law. We aren't expected to win, and yet we are doing it. Oh, you're on mute.
By the end of all of this, at least I'll maybe know how to run a Zoom. Hi, girls. It's such a pleasure to be here and with everyone on here. How neato.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of Dan for doing this. This is a really cool forum. Congratulations, Miss Christian. Holy shit.
Right?
You know, and the thing I have with these statistics is I think they're important so that we understand, like, you know, it's not us. Do you know what I mean? Like you go in there and you think, fuck, it must be me. It must be me why I can't, you know, all these big men sitting up in the big chairs are always like, just try more cases, you know? And for years I've been thinking like, what the fuck is wrong with me? But I think this, and also that it's not just plaintiffs, it's plaintiffs, and it's just, you know, this is what it's like to be in the legal profession. But I had this conversation a few years ago with Artemis Allenpour, who works with David Ball. And she said, you know, the one place where I'm not seeing this inequality is in the actual courtroom. I mean, I'm sure there is. And I'm sure when, you know, let's be honest, the heuristic is always going to be chauvinist and patriotism, patriarchy. So it's the same thing. God bless America. But what she was saying was, look, these are a lot of the struggles we face within our law firms. These are a lot of the struggles we face with the men who are currently in leadership positions on both sides of the bar. But our juries are made up of over 51% women. So this isn't a problem for us. I think this is a problem for the men who seem to be holding the cases and the access for us to the courtroom. This isn't a conversation we need to keep having with each other. It's the conversation they need to have amongst themselves at some point, or, you know, when they finally start dying off, which is beginning to happen.
Okay, I want to, before we go back, Bibi, because I know you had a couple of things, but I wanted to answer some of the questions in the chat, and maybe we all can. So one of the questions is, how do you deal with male bully lawyers? Like when you send requests for production, then they send garbage general objections, then in a meet and confer, mistake professional politeness as sucker weakness, etc. I'll start answering. You know, what I do is I use humor. It really it works for me. And I think that we're going to hear that everything kind of works differently for everyone. But what I like to do is, I'll say, like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what am I going to do with this information? And then let's talk about it. And then we're in the meet and confer, and and I'm like, are you going to make me miss time with my kids to write a motion on this? And they're like, and I say, all right, fine, look, I'll give you a week. I'm a nice lady. I'll give you a week. If you don't get back to me in a week, I got to file my motion. And so I am giving them this extension. I'm giving it to them in the nicest way. I'm telling them they're not doing a great job, but I always do it kind of like with a lightness, with a sense of humor, because it really is just in these kind of cases, an objection, and it's something it's just discovery. But I got to tell you, if you follow on in the courtroom when it happens, I 100% ignore it. And I've even had them say, did you hear me? And I don't even answer, because I have no involvement in that. Like if they're being rude and they're asking me the question, they keep asking and asking and asking, like yelling it at me, I act like I can't hear them. That's just my way of dealing with it, because responding to them, I know, would make my blood boil a little bit if I don't have a way to find humor. Like in the trial I was just in, the guy pulled down his mask and he was screaming at me in front of the judge. And I just started laughing. And he's like, why are you laughing? I'm like, because you're being aggressive. And he's like, you're being aggressive. So then I started laughing again. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Or I was up using the easel paper, and when I was done and it was his turn to take the witness, he says, well, you can just stand up here and write for me in front of the jury. So I just like grabbed my easel paper and like walked off. I got no response to that. It's not worth it for me. The trial isn't about me. The way he's treating me has nothing to do with the trial. I'm trying to put my case on and put my evidence on. And so when I can't use humor to deal with it, I literally just ignore it, because I have a job to do and I'm not going to let them get in my way. So that's the way I handle stuff like that.
Yeah, I like to counteract that, men are reasonable and women are emotional stereotype. So usually my first line defense is I'm just the most reasonable person you've ever seen. I am like textbook reasonable. I am like a Boda star-studded reasonable about it, which, when you go in front of a judge, then you have that contrast between me being super reasonable and then whatever antics they're pulling, and you're a lot more likely to get what relief you're asking for, whether it's a protective order, discovery referee. I just lived through one of the biggest battles with a jerk opposing counsel that I've been in my entire career. And the judge, by the time we got there, I was so reasonable in the depositions. I was so reasonable in my meet and confers. By the time we got there, the judge dressed this guy down and told him that what he was doing was unethical and in violation of our rules of professional conduct. I mean, I got a lot more mileage out of biting my tongue a little and being reasonable and giving him enough rope to hang himself. So that's kind of my first line defense. My second line defense is I just go full mom on them. I am so saddened by the way that you are behaving. I am so disappointed in the way that our relationship has been. And I just go full on mom. Like I'm not, by nature, I don't like confrontation, but I've gotten really good at being a mom. So that's how I know how to confront people. And you should see how ashamed some of these men feel when you go full mom on them. Like I've gotten page-long apology emails after I've said, wow, that's so disappointing. And then if I'm feeling super spicy, my third line of defense is to flip the narrative on them. And I'll say, my goodness, it seems like you're so emotional about this topic, and I'm trying to figure out why. I'm the reasonable one, you're the emotional one, and you should see guys hit the roof at being called emotional.
Courtney, you got anything on that one?
Sometimes it gets exhausting. I find though that it's not just men, a lot of the women I've dealt with on the other side, especially some that are still kind of part of that old guard. And I think when I say that, I think they came by it very honestly. I think there was a time where in order to practice law, you did have to behave. as a woman, you did have to behave either like a man or like how you perceived men to behave, because it is bloody dangerous. And it is, it has not been a welcoming or friendly environment. I do believe that's changing. But yeah, I love what Bibi said about the I'm disappointed in your behavior. We had been going back to back trials. God, it feels like forever ago. Maybe it was only 2 years ago, but I don't know. In another lifetime. And we ended up in Iowa, and these guys just started behaving so bizarrely. And I stood up in the thing and I was like, I was looking so forward to trying case in Iowa because you guys are the ones that are actually well behaved. And I just can't deal with this today. So I'm going to walk out. You sort it out. You write the jury instructions. You put whatever you want in there. We'll deal with it tomorrow. And I walked out, and I got one of Bibi's apology letters, which was kind of wild. But it was just like, mom's had enough, Fuck.
Well, part of your answer leads into another question that's in the chat, which is dealing kind of with women, right? Because they can be just as aggressive as men. And the question is, how about studies about women facing defense lawyers on the other side? And I think the question was studies about women facing women defense counsel. And, I've had it both ways. I tried a case. It was actually after Embrace Your Inner Badass, our last conference. I had to leave early because I had this trial. And the woman was so nice that she gave me everything I asked for. So I just kept asking. I'm like, oh my God, she's like so caught up in being nice to me that she's really not working her case. And so, everything I asked for, she gave, Marcia, do you think I could do this? Marcia, do you think I could do that? Marcia, are you okay if I do this? And literally, so the case was just such a bad case, but she was just so nice and didn't want to argue that some of the stuff she said after I got a plaintiff's verdict, which I don't know how I did, the judge gave me an adder of $100,000 based on statements that Marcia had made in closing argument. And after I had the trial, I went over to her and I said, this was just the most pleasant trial I've ever had. And she's like, oh, was it? And I'm like, yes, thank you so much. And she was so overcome with trying to be nice that she wasn't repping her client, which I rarely had on the other side, because what Courtney mentioned is the kind of the old guard, where these women, there weren't enough seats at the table. And so they were vying for that seat, and they didn't know how to do it without looking like and acting like, or trying to be a man. I used to wear a pantsuit all the time. I will never wear one again. I wear a dress to every trial. And I don't wear suits unless there's a reason why, because it makes me feel mentally better if I'm challenging an expert or something. But it's always a skirt suit, because I was trying to look and act like a man. And I was told by juries in the beginning to relax, calm down, like, gosh, why are you so aggressive? And I'm like, that dude was like, I thought it was working, and I've learned obviously it hasn't, but I've gone up with those ladies too. I had a trial and they literally just put a woman on the other side because I was a woman. They just stuck this poor girl up there and were telling her what to do. And she was trying to do it nasty at the same time. And it's almost like she wasn't old guard, but she didn't know any better. So she was trying to be it. And so I started being like the polite older gentleman to her. I'd get the door. I would go, because it works for men. So I was like, you can go to the bench first. Because when you walk up, they're always like, oh. And I'm like, wait, so you're my arch enemy, but you're going to hold the door for me so you can look polite. But you're going to really bash me when we get to the bench, but I get to go first. Okay, gotcha. And so I started doing that with her, and she just didn't know what to do. And I honestly don't know how it was going to work out, because they ended up just settling the case. So we never actually got to verdict. So I don't know if there's studies about it, but I think if we're cognizant of where our issues are and how we're navigating around them, we can honestly kind of use it with, like Bibi said, like flip the script on them and, kind of use it to our advantage, because we know where those issues and quote weaknesses are in the perception, that we can use that against them to win.